Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, Freaky Fridays with Sonia. I am Sonia, and if you are intrigued by the enigmatic, dark, strange, mysterious, paranormal, real life happenings from all around the world, then you've come to the right channel because that's what I do. I will be uploading a spooky, creepy, freaky video every Friday. So if that's of interest to you, do subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so that you get notified every time I upload a video. And if you do like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Before I begin, I would like to give a disclaimer. I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. All of this information is just information that I have researched and found online, and I have compiled it in a story format for the purpose of this video. All that being said, let's dive right in. In 1889, Karl Tanzler was a 12-year-old boy who lived in Dresden, Germany with his family. One night, Karl was asleep and he had this very vivid dream. And in that dream, Karl found himself looking into a void, just nothingness. And all of a sudden, Karl heard footsteps behind him. So Karl turns around and there he sees a woman walking towards him. The woman was dressed in a long, elegant, white Victorian gown. And she came up to him and she introduced herself as Anna Constantia von Brockdorf. I hope I've pronounced that right. And if I haven't, I apologize. Anna told Karl that she was a noble woman, a real woman who lived in Germany in the early 1700s. She also told him that she was one of his ancestors and that she had been sent to him to pass on and to convey a very important message to him. So Karl was taken aback. He was a little anxious. He was confused, wondering what is this message? And as he was wondering all of this, Anna pointed in the direction that she had come from. So Karl looks in that direction and he sees this beautiful face, the beautiful face of a young lady with dark, beautiful hair, porcelain skin. But she did look a little sad and a little frail. And that face kept floating out of that void. And it came right up to Karl and stopped right here. And then Anna spoke to Karl and said, Karl, this woman, this young lady will come into your life during the course of your life. And she will be very sick. And it is going to be your duty. It is going to be your life's mission to save this woman, to keep her alive and to protect her. With that, Karl in real life woke up and he realized that he was in his bed in his house, but it seemed so real. He could clearly remember the faces of Anna, the face of the dark-haired, alabaster-skinned young lady. It was etched in his memory. Karl thought about that dream all day, but at the end of the day, he thought, you know what, it was just a dream. However, over the next couple of weeks and months and years, Karl would have the same dream, the same recurring dream. Anna also told him, be aware, look for this woman. You'll have to find her through the course of your life. And Karl did that. Through his life, he was ever so vigilant. He was ever so aware, always looking for this dark-haired, alabaster-skinned, beautiful young woman. But unfortunately, he didn't find her. Fast forward now to the year 1926, and Karl is now 39 years of age. Karl was married, not to the woman from his visions or dreams, but to a local woman called Doris Schaefer, who also was from Dresden, Germany, and together they had started a family. They had 2 daughters together, and they were living a normal, simple life. During the course of that year, in 1926, Germany had a terrible economic downturn. So Carl and Doris decided to leave Germany for good, and they decided to emigrate and shift their base and their home to the United States in the hope of a better life for them and their children. And that's exactly what they did. So the family settled in central Florida, and Carl had studied to be a radiology technologist. During the course of that year, Carl and his wife had a lot of marital problems, and they decided to split up, and that's what they did. So they parted ways. So Carl left his family home. In fact, he left central Florida altogether, and he moved to southern Florida, where he settled in a town called Key West. He got a job in the local hospital as an X-ray technician, and that's how life was. All along, somewhere, Carl did have that unfulfilled feeling that he had not fulfilled his life's purpose. He had not found the woman that he was supposed to save. He was unhappy that his ancestors would be unhappy with him. But what could he do? He could never find this woman. A couple of years passed, and now we are talking about the year 1930. Carl is still working at the hospital, and he's going about his normal day. And one fine day, an older woman walks in and tells Carl that she needed to get an X-ray of the chest, not for her, but for her 21-year-old daughter, who had developed a very severe cough which wasn't subsiding or wasn't healing. So the family was a little worried, and they wanted to have an X-ray conducted. So Carl says, absolutely, ma'am, and he starts with the formalities. He gets out the paperwork. He starts with all the registration, filling out forms, and he's engrossed in the formalities. While in the meantime, the 21-year-old daughter walks in, and Carl happened to look up, and there she was, the woman from his visions, the woman from his dreams. The same face, the very same alabaster porcelain skin, the very same dark hair, and she was sick. This was it. This was the woman that he was supposed to save. So he kind of shook himself out of his mesmerization, and he came back to reality, and he looks at the mother and he says, you know what, ma'am, you don't need to worry. I'm going to do everything in my power to save your daughter. And the mother said, okay, thank you very much. I mean, she was a little taken aback by his word usage, because, I mean, she did know her daughter wasn't well, but I'll save your daughter's life, like, what was he implying? Carl went up to the 21-year-old young lady and he introduced himself. He said, I'm Carl. And she said, I'm Elena. And he once again emphasized and told her, you know, you do not need to worry. I will do everything in my capacity to save you and to get you well. And she said, thank you very much. I appreciate it. You know, she was a little weirded out, but polite. So Carl takes her and gets the X-ray done. And a while later, when the reports came in, they weren't good, because 21-year-old Elena had contracted tuberculosis, which in today's time and age is a very curable, a very treatable disease. But we're talking about the 1930s, where this was equal to a death sentence. So, of course, Elena and her mother are extremely dejected. But Carl, I mean, he was actually a little excited, because, I mean, this was it. This was the same woman, the same face. I mean, how could he forget that face? He's had this dream for years. The same hair, the same skin, and she's not well. So this is it. He's getting his chance to fulfill his life's mission. Over the next 1 year, Carl did everything possible, everything in his capacity to save Elena. He went over and above, over and beyond. Carl was not a doctor, but so he had no idea about how to treat tuberculosis, but he did his own research. He was in touch with Elena and her family on a daily basis. He would suggest alternate treatments, alternate therapies, alternate medications. very often even, paying for it out of his own pocket. However, despite Carl's every effort, despite Carl's best efforts, in 1931, that is a year after he met Elena and tried to save her and get her well, in the year 1931, Elena unfortunately passed away because the tuberculosis had spread, and she passed. And of course, her family was devastated. However, their devastation was nothing as compared to what Carl was going through. He felt like he had died too. I mean, how did this happen? How did he let this happen? He thought to himself, like, this was my life's mission. I was supposed to save this woman. I have failed. How did I let this happen? Now it came to the time for Elena to be buried and laid to rest. And Carl came forward and spoke to her family, and he said that he would like to bear all of the expenses from the funeral to erecting the gravestone. He also asked for permission to build her a mausoleum, which is a tomb-like structure where the body of Elena would be kept. Her family, though they were a little taken aback, they said, you know what, let him do it. He was very close to Elena. He had grown very attached to her over the last 1 year, and he did do everything possible to save her. So they said, okay. So Carl actually had a mausoleum constructed where Elena's coffin was kept. However, Carl's behavior just happened to go from bad to worse. Once this mausoleum was erected, Carl spent virtually all of his time inside this mausoleum. He would be talking to Elena, on his knees, begging for her forgiveness, crying, pleading. And this went on for years. In 1933, so Elena passed away in 1931, and Carl spent all of his time up until 1933 inside this mausoleum. And even thereafter, for 7 years, up until 1940, Carl's behavior went on and on and on. And Elena's family thought, this is getting a little too much, because Carl was making Elena's loss all about himself. But she was their daughter, and he had only one key made, one key to the mausoleum, and that key was in his onus. So they decided, you know what, we're going to talk to him and tell him to hand over the key to the mausoleum, because that's the only way. And he also needs to let her go. He needs to move on. Also, we're talking about 1940. A lot of rumors were doing the rounds where many of Carl's acquaintances and neighbors happened to inform Elena's family that Carl was behaving very weirdly. He was buying a lot of exquisite clothing, women's clothing, jewelry, makeup, perfumes, for whom some of his neighbors even reported seeing him dancing with a woman, laughing. So apparently he had a woman in his house. In October of 1940, Elena's sister, whose name was Florinda, decided, this is it. So she sits in her car and she drives up to Carl's house. And as she's driving through the driveway, she sees that all the lights are on in his house, which is a good thing, right? Because that means Carl's at home. And as she parks her car in the driveway and she's looking in, she can see Carl, and he's very exquisitely dressed, very proper, very elaborately dressed. And he's ballroom dancing with a woman who's also very exquisitely dressed in a gown. And she can hear music, and there's Carl's laughing. So for a minute she thought, should I, just go home and come another day? But then she thought, I've come all this way let's just get this over and done with. So she gets out of her car, she walks right up to his door, and she knocks on the door. The moment she knocked on the door, all the lights were switched off, the music was turned off. She waited for a while and then she knocked again. Again, no response. It was like the people inside didn't want her to know that there was anyone at home. So she knocked for a third time, a little more forcefully, and she said, you know, Carl, I saw you, I know you're at home. So can you just open the door, because I just need to talk to you about something urgent. After a while, the lights were switched on and Carl came up to the door. He opened the door just a slight bit and there was a little crack through which he spoke to her. And he said, what do you want? And she said, look, this is about my sister Elena. So can I come in for a while, or will you come out? It won't take long. It's just going to take a few minutes. And Carl got all edgy and he abruptly said, absolutely not. And he slammed the door on Florinda's face. However, what Carl didn't realize was that when Florinda spoke about Elena to him, and he got a little edgy, so his body shifted, and Florinda from the outside could actually look directly inside the house at the woman who was seated on a chair looking at the door. And there she was. It was her sister Elena. Florinda was overwhelmed. She was mind-boggled. She didn't know what to do, what to think. She staggered back to her car. She sat in the driver's seat and she drove straight to the police station. She informed the authorities about exactly what had happened, all the rumors. A while later, the police showed up at Carl's house. They knocked on the door and they demanded to be let in. And Carl now knew that he had no option, so he let them come in. And there they saw her. They saw Elena. However, she had been deceased. She had been deceased for many, many years. Carl was arrested. He was taken in for questioning. He said that this was still his way of fulfilling his life's mission and trying to bring Elena back to life. Carl said that Elena died in 1931, and up until 1933, he would go to the mausoleum where Elena would come and talk to him, and they would spend hours talking. He would sing songs to her, he would serenade her. And Carl said that one night in 1933, that is 7 years down the line, Elena told Carl that she was not happy in this mausoleum, in this cemetery, and she requested him to take her back to his house. And of course, Carl very willingly said, okay. So he took her body out of the coffin, he took her out of the mausoleum, he put her on a wagon, and he took her straight to his house. However, her body was obviously badly decomposed. But Carl did everything again. Everything in his capacity to get her back to normal. He used piano wire to string and attach all her bones together in an attempt to get her skeletal form back. Replaced her eyes with glass eyes. Somehow he managed to get her real hair, which he kind of made into a wig for her scalp. Since her skin was badly decomposed, he used silk cloth which had been soaked in a special kind of wax and plaster of Paris. He stuffed all of her insides with clothing and rags in order to give it a more fuller and more normal appearance. And every day he would change Elena's clothing, her jewelry, put on makeup for her, comb her hair. He would use a lot of perfume in order to diffuse the smell. He used a lot of disinfectants and preserving solutions to diffuse the odor. Carl would tell the police and the authorities that they lived a normal life. I mean, they spoke, they laughed together, they cried together, they slept together. Carl also went on to say that it was his plan to launch Elena's body into the stratosphere, where he believed that the radiation up there would bring her back to life and send her back to him as Elena. Carl was unfortunately unable to launch Elena's body into the stratosphere. However, he was charged and he did go to trial. However, the charges against him were dropped after a while due to the statute of limitations in that particular case expiring. And Carl was a free man. And at the end of his trial, he actually asked back for Elena's body and he was told absolutely not. As for Elena's body, it was handed back to her family where she was buried in Key West in a secret unknown location, especially unknown to Carl. And Carl went on to live the rest of his life separated from his lover, from his obsession. So he built a real life effigy, a doll of Elena, which he lived with, and he was found at the age of 75, deceased, hugging that lifelike doll of Elena. So that's gonna do it for today, guys. That's what I have for you. What are your thoughts on this entire story? Do leave your comments in the comment section below. I would love to read what your thoughts are and what your take is on this. If you do want to reach out to me, all of my social media handles will be mentioned. My username is the same. It's soniahaeems on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. And until I see you next Friday with another freaky story, stay safe, stay happy, keep smiling, and bye-bye.